Three, two, one. John Chapman, you are one of the head honchos at Pinders. You are the master of ceremonies for the Healthcare Design Awards, and you're also the only person to ever quote Burt Bacharach in an email to me. Welcome to the Care Home Show.
Hello, good to be here.
So I thought that it would be worthwhile starting off with just finding out a little bit more about John Chapman and what you do at Pinders and the Healthcare Design Awards, and really see where that takes us. I'd imagine that most people will have heard of you and of Pinders, but just for anyone out there that maybe hasn't been to one of your events and or been one of the beneficiaries of one of your presentations, can you fill us in a little bit about you and what it is you're up to in the world?
Yeah. The starting point, I suppose, is I'm a business valuer is my official job, and I've been doing that now for 29 years with Pinders. And I've all that time managed to avoid all the other types of businesses that we look at, and have concentrated on the care home sector. So that's what I do and what I know, and I get to go around the country valuing care homes. Mostly for people buying them or for bank purposes, but also helping people develop their care homes, redesign them, which is my greater interest really. And out of that, 20 years ago now, we started the Healthcare Design Awards, which was really trying to put a bit of good news into the care sector, because it's a load of bad news, but also to try and encourage the positive side. And I think that's an area where we've seen so much improvement over that 20-year period as people have embraced new ideas and new design technology and that sort of thing. I suppose a lot of people probably know me from being on stage at the awards. I think some people still don't realise that the funny little bloke who dresses up and tells silly gags is actually supposed to be also a serious business valuer and expert on the sector. So possibly through today that I might be able to redress the balance a little bit and show that I do know a little bit about the sector as well.
I must say I'm a little bit disappointed that you are not wearing your gold sparkly suit that you wore for the Healthcare Design Awards that year. That was one hell of a number.
You're very lucky that you missed the year when I was in a green tutu, actually. So which is something that still gets thrown back at me quite often these days by people who are scarred at the time.
So we can come on to Pinders in a little bit more detail in a little while. I remember asking you this question when we first got together, but people might not understand the link in between Pinders and the Healthcare Design Awards, because there's obviously kind of a story about how that came to be. Both Pinders and the Healthcare Design Awards play an important part in the sector. But yeah, it'd be interesting to hear that story.
Yes, I mean, the design awards themselves actually predates our involvement. It goes back nearly 30 years to a chap called Nick Borrett who set this up with the same ambition, and it ran for a few years as a much smaller event, and then unfortunately due to lack of sponsorship really fizzled out, and we at Pinders resurrected it and got a number of the major banks involved to provide the money, which was good news, and we provided the judging and the expertise, and it took off from there. And it's grown and grown and grown, as people know, over the years into something slightly different. But I think the key bit from our point of view was we always wanted the awards to be meaningful. We wanted people to strive to win one. And I can honestly say, and people will know this, that you can't buy one of our awards through sponsorship or advertising or anything of that sort. We go and visit every project that gets to be a final, so it takes a lot of time and effort, but it also means that people recognise that it's worth winning, and that's hopefully something that's remained right the way through the time. And through that, and through the sharing of ideas and information, I think that we've collectively, and it's not down to us, it's been really that the architects and the developers, the operators have all actually embraced the idea of raising standards. I always say that we provided a forum where everybody can nick everybody else's ideas, and that's basically it, which they do. And I still get a buzz out of going and doing the judging because I like to see what people have come up with. I like to see new ideas, some that work, some that don't work, but to understand why people are trying it. And that's really very little to do with property these days. It's very much to do with caring for the people that they're caring for, how they're doing it, how we can embrace technology, how we can change things, how we can do things in a different way. And so it's great to see people with new ideas. And I then take that idea and tell somebody else so that we spread the word, and everybody then hopefully everything gets better. So the standards have certainly risen at that time.
I guess it creates a forum in which to help people to turn the dial up on the sector, which can only be a good thing, right? And you do it in the context of what is a thoroughly enjoyable evening as well. So it's good fun. Obviously, I've been just once, but I hope to attend again in the future. It was it's a great evening, and it's good to see real quality celebrated. As you say, it's an opportunity for people to see what does innovation look like, how can we not just improve the actual care facilities, but then how does that then impact the well-being of the residents and things? Because it's all very well, of course, having a fancy pants care home that looks absolutely wonderful, but ultimately it's got to be practical, and it's got to ensure the well-being of the residents and things as well. So, question for you just on that point: what things have you seen? What developments have you seen over the last few things that you think are the kind of key inflection points, the things that are kind of making the biggest difference at the moment from a design perspective?
I think there's two aspects. You've got to remember is that to get into the design awards, you've got to be doing most of the things right. So in terms of, when we started out, if it was a single bedroom with an ensuite toilet, it was innovative. So we've moved way beyond that. I think the two big avenues now is outdoor space. Space is at a premium, so we do have to build buildings that are multi-storey. But it's how you can actually then still provide easy access to the outside world. And I think certainly now with using balconies, terraces, roof gardens, etc., that's been a huge leap forward. And to be honest, even in urban cities now, we're actually seeing that people are still giving that a great deal of thought and innovation. I think the second area is technology, and I think we're now seeing a wave of technology coming through, which is making the lives of the residents better by making them more independent, but also making the staffing requirements easier. And I think certainly this generation of technology, we had a bit of a false start a few years ago, where suddenly we threw electronics at it. Some worked, some didn't, and I think we've learned some lessons from that. I think the new systems that we're coming through now, particularly with handheld devices now, allowing staff to actually do the laborious parts of record keeping, which are vital but take up a lot of time. Almost as the activity happens, which gives them the opportunity to spend more time talking with residents, activities with residents, etc. So I think those two areas have really, probably the last 3 years, have really been the thing we're noticing most as a big innovation.
I guess from a technological perspective as well, there's a thing called Moore's Law, if I remember correctly, which is the exponential growth of technology over a period of time. And of course, technology, it's iterative, isn't it? You've got kind of the Elon Musks of the world kind of taking a product to market as a kind of a relatively basic version of whatever it is, and then coming up with a newer, better version quickly to make sure that it's kind of fit for purpose, and that it's kind of fulfilling the expectation of what should be a fantastic product. It's no different with technology in any sense. So I guess the real positive that can be taken from that is the fact that this is probably just the tip of the iceberg, isn't it? There's probably a whole world of new technology which we haven't even thought of yet, that's gonna start being quite groundbreaking. I was at a Future of Care event not so long ago, and the conversation of care robots came on to the was part of the context for the day. Interestingly enough, he's the gentleman Chris Papadopoulos, who's I think he's a professor at Buckingham University, if I remember correctly. I'm in the process of trying to get him on the podcast as well, because there's a conversation that I think that needs to be explored in its entirety and things as well. So what's next for the Care Home Design Awards, or sorry, Healthcare Design Awards?
Well, as we're recording this in early June, this is the period of time when I'm usually dreading the thought of it, actually trying to come up with something for next March. I always say this is going to be the last one because to come up with new ideas. I think it's getting harder and harder for people entering to actually come up with something that's new and different. And I think we don't want to be critical, but I think we went slightly off beam a few years ago because almost inevitably, because of the cost of land, the cost of building, the cost of rents means that you have to charge a lot of money to make all of that work, which means that the conclusion was that we therefore have to offer 5-star luxury to justify such a high price. So we ended up creating hotels. And I've been critical in the past about, the number of chandeliers in care homes is not the single of good care. I actually joked a few years ago and said I'd love for people to send me a press release that says we've just launched a 3.5-star care home rather than the 5-star luxury care home, because those two messages often get confused. Is that with 5-star luxury, home from home, and I'm going, well, nobody lives in a 5-star care home, 5-star hotel, so it can't be home from home, and you end up with something that looks almost like a stage set where the pixies come out at night and put everything back, and nobody feels that they can actually live in it. And I think we've learned from that, and I think the last couple of years some of the finalists are superb quality, but they don't look artificial. They are something that you would be pleased to living at home. The quality of the furnishings, the quality of the fittings, everything is all very good, but it doesn't have to be gold plated. And I think that's one of the things that we're learning now. So I'm hoping that going forward that people will realise that actually they want to create a home rather than a hotel. I think that's one of the key lessons. But it's getting very difficult. It's getting very difficult to come up with something that we haven't seen before. And to a certain extent, perhaps that's how it should be, because we don't want people to do things that are tricks for the sake of doing them. It's because the danger is that actually that's going to spoil the product. So it may be that the Design Awards almost reaches a plateau where actually we turn around and go, to be honest, we can do no more because we're not advancing anymore, or we're looking at different things. We're certainly looking less at architecture now, and certainly more at interior design in terms of, particularly for dementia care, looking at using visual cues, look more thoughtfully, not just slavishly following the theory that people think the universities have come up with over the years, but actually to look and go, well, does that really work? Every time I go to a care home where they've got multicoloured front doors on the bedrooms, I ask the staff, do these actually work? I haven't, other than have one person who's actually passionately says, yes, I think they do. A lot of other people think they don't, but we should be now actually analysing that rather than necessarily doing it. Having a fake door knocker and a letterbox on a bedroom door so that I think I'm outside but I'm actually standing in a nice warm corridor, doesn't that actually become more confusing to somebody with dementia than actually just having a normal plain door? So I think the great skill is looking at the attention to detail and actually not just putting things up in places because it looks pretty, but actually to look at how it's being used. And I think one of the biggest problems, I think, is that designers forget to explain to the staff the design. So part of it needs to be that iterative process you mentioned. It needs to actually look at how the design works for individuals. What will spook somebody out might not affect everybody else, but the staff need to be able to understand that and actually to be able to adjust the environment, to adjust the design accordingly. So I think that's when we see the really good homes, it's how the whole package, the architects, the interior designers, the technology, the staff, the management, all come together with a clear understanding, and you can then see the big difference that makes.
Absolutely. It's interesting. So from almost like an architectural and like a superstructure perspective, the plateau is almost, we seem to have found what appears to be good fundamentals. It's almost refining those, the specific things that are going to take take well-being from being good to being through to being outstanding. I had a really interesting conversation with a new development fund who are looking to build care homes, and they came to us to have a discussion to say, we understand care homes. One of the guys is an operator, the other chap's a property guy, and they said we need to work out exactly what the product needs to look like at the end of the design process now, so that we can factor everything into the to making sure that the product is everything that it possibly can be. And I thought, you know what, that's really refreshing, because it happens all too often. It happens that a fantastic, very expensive care home will be built, but actually they've got the fundamentals wrong, and then reconfiguration needs to happen, interior design needs to change, because fundamentally it doesn't actually work for the resident, for the end user, which it kind of defies the whole point, and it makes it very expensive and slightly backwards.
The only bit I'd add into that, because I've seen it before, is where people have gone with that good intention, and then they've set up committees and we've got everybody involved, and you end up with a five-legged elephant, because no one person actually had a clear vision of what was right. The greatest thing you can build into any design is flexibility. So it shouldn't be that we've all decided on paper that's what it should look like, and we create it and that's what it's going to look like forever, because it needs to evolve, it needs to change. I mean, we've got, something like Hallmark are very good. We've just done a special award to them for the number of projects they've had in the awards over the last 20 years. But I often say to Avnish Goyal there, it was noticeable when he stopped listening to everybody and started listening to a fewer people, and actually trusting their own team to go, actually, we've now probably got as good an idea as anybody, and we're prepared to continually challenge that and tweak it and evolve it, rather than trying to listen to absolutely everybody's views and try and combine them all and ended up with something that doesn't quite work. So it's good that people are trying to sort of not just do the easy, but actually to look at challenging that. But they've also, I think, got to be trying to build that flexibility into the system. Care villages, in their widest sense, are the most flexible product, because every person coming into care will come in at a different time, with a different story, with different needs, and those will all change over time.
Of course.
So the idea of a village where I can come in at 78, 79 with my wife, and we're still going to go skiing and rollerblading, and we're going to use the bistro restaurant and all the facilities, that's great. But if one of us gets dementia and the other one doesn't, how do you deal with that? And the fact that actually, within the village, that can be looked after either within our own apartment or possibly within a specialist facility, whilst keeping the couple together. That's a great thing that we can do. So I do think flexible approach, and again, coming back to even within a care home environment, is making sure that everybody goes, okay, this isn't working, let's tweak it. Not to say, well, that's what the designer said, and therefore we've got to stick with it.
Yeah, sure.
Which can be a bit of a problem.
Making sure that it's fit for purpose. It's a sustainability question more than anything else, because if you're going to put so much money into a facility of any kind, it needs to work now. It needs to work in 5 years. It needs to work in 10, 20 plus years. I'm not sure whether I like the term future-proofed, because things change, and I just don't know whether that's necessarily achievable. But going a long way to make sure that it's future-proof to the extent that it can be, obviously makes an awful lot of sense. Again, it comes back to the fact that the end user, the resident, and it needs to deliver the best possible care, or the best environment for care to be delivered, and then for the team, for them to be able to operate effectively and do what they need to do to deliver good or outstanding care, whatever their aspiration might be. So,
but the environment is only there to facilitate good care. It doesn't provide good care in itself. That may sound quite obvious, but it's that's just the backdrop, and the more flexible you can keep that backdrop to allow people to live individually within it, and to allow the staff greater role in terms of actually changing things and evolving things, the better. It's when you've got this stage set, as I said, and it's almost like nobody feels. I'll tell you a powerful story which goes back years. When this lady who was in one of the Sunrise homes. When Sunrise came in with the luxury home very early on, and they said, it's got the sweeping staircase and the grand piano and everything. And they said to the lady and said, "Do you like it here?" And she said, "Oh, it's absolutely fabulous. Couldn't wish for anything. It's got we've got drinks cabinet, we've got this. It's marvellous." And then she stopped and she said, "Although of an afternoon I go and see my sister who's in the local authority home down the road because you're allowed to take your shoes off there." And it was that idea of almost, this is too good. We're going to a 5-star hotel next week for an award ceremony. It's nice to stay in a 5-star hotel for a night, but I wouldn't want to live in one because you could never relax. And it's that same idea. So rough and ready can often provide better care. It's all about the staff and the people actually running it. The environment can hinder that, but it isn't the substitute for that attention to detail.
Also, as well, when you're talking about the top end of the sector, some of the real fancy pants homes that are, they're delightful. Again, they're like a five-star hotel. That's not what wealth distribution looks like in the UK. Not everyone can afford that. We also need to be building really, really good quality care homes for everyone, because whether it be 12, 15, 1,800, 2,000 pounds a week type care in one of those styles of care homes, it's just not achievable. So what happens to everyone else when the kind of more traditional type of care home isn't fit for purpose anymore? We need to have a solution to that. And at the moment, I think we're going a long way to trying to make sure that is the case. But I guess I have worries to a certain extent around how much are we doing as a sector to contribute towards that. So that's an open question for
it's a very difficult one.
A lot of people.
Because I am now so very, very old, I can remember 25 years ago when Westminster Healthcare and Take Care and people like that created the first purpose-built homes really at that time, sort of the early 90s. And I remember writing a piece in one of the magazines at the time saying, my vision in 20 years' time is that these will be effectively the workhouses, the local authority equivalent. At that time, of course, at that point they were cutting edge. They had 10 square metre bedrooms, and some of them even had ensuite toilets.
Wow.
This was but of course standards moved on, and they are now still around, but they've gone through various different incarnations and operators. We are seeing a number of 1960s, 1970s, even 2000 purpose-built care homes, which we would now just not regard as being best practice.
Yeah,
and
absolutely right.
They've moved down as other things have come in. It's a really difficult one because we haven't done a gradual progression in terms of design. We've gone from pretty much Victorian conversion to fabulous palaces as we're doing now. For the reasons I mentioned earlier, it's not that we're doing this out of sort of a false idea. It's purely driven by finances. I have to charge £1,500 a week to pay the rent that I'm paying to the Real Estate Investment Trust. So because that piece of land and that building cost me £130,000, £140,000 a bed.
Yeah.
So to make it work, I have to charge that fee.
Of course, yeah.
So it's not that these are greedy, money-grubbing operators.
It's just
it's purely the fact that property costs are so high, and the care sector has become a property investment vehicle.
Of course,
and that's where the money is going to. So we've certainly seen a big split in terms of the provision. I think what is dangerous, though, and I'm probably not say a unique position, but certainly an unusual position, the fact that I see everything from the real horrible stuff at the bottom to the very best stuff at the top.
It's a very unique perspective.
And I have to say that the stuff in the middle is not nearly as bad as it's made out to be. I think we're guilty as hell in this sector of moaning. I say I've been in this 29 years. The care sector has been in crisis for all of that time.
Of course.
That's the word. It's always been in crisis. All of the leaders, the politicians and everybody else is in crisis. What we need is more money. If you threw more money at it, it'd be fine. And yeah, that's true to a certain extent, but it's not worked that way. When more money has been thrown at it, it hasn't really changed that dynamic particularly. It doesn't suddenly make a bad home good. It doesn't make a it doesn't mean that a purpose-built fancy new home is necessarily going to provide good quality care. But there's lots and lots of homes in the middle which actually would almost be written off because they're not brand spanking new. They don't have ensuite wet rooms, etc. And yet the quality of care being provided in them is excellent. Mm-hmm. How can they do that even though they haven't got the money? The fact that £1,500 a week fee actually doesn't make the operator more money than a £500 fee.
Yeah.
Because your costs of property are so huge that actually your return on your capital investment is pretty much the same.
Mm-hmm. It's just the economics of the situation. There's no.
But the perception is that we need £1,500 a week. It really drives me mad when I see these fair price and fair costing exercises. I mean, we've done them, and when I've done them for local authorities, I've said there isn't such a thing as a fair price. And if you want that, go and speak to one of the other experts on this, because it depends on what you're providing. We first of all have to define what the service is, both in terms of the property, the accommodation, the staffing levels, everything. We have to define all of that and then cost it. But we come out with exercises, and the press, of course, pick up on this, where they'll turn around and say, the studies come out and says that the absolute minimum cost is £685 a week, or whatever it might be. But actually, that's based on corporate operators providing fabulous facilities. It's not based necessarily upon somebody who's got a Victorian conversion with rooms with no en-suites. Mm-hmm. So
it's too blunt an instrument, isn't it? But that's a. And
I was delighted. I'll tell you a little story about this the other day. I was actually at a lunch in Nottingham recently, and operator came up to me, and it's always worrying when people do this. Can I have a word with you afterwards? God, what have I done now? And he said, I just wanted to thank you. And I said, okay, what for? And he said, well, 10 years ago, Pinders were engaged by Nottinghamshire Council to do a fair cost exercise for them. Mm. And it was a really unusual situation where they were very enlightened. Both the council and the Home Association in the area actually decided to cooperate on this exercise with Pinders to help them. And I explained to them that there was no way that we were going to come out with a single figure. Mm-hmm. What we came out with their agreement was actually a 5-star rating system, which was based upon the accommodation standards and the quality of care, etc. Both. And therefore, when this gentleman said to me, he said, I probably wouldn't be still in the sector, let alone I think he's now got a dozen homes, because he said what this system did was it actually paid a higher fee for the higher quality. Mm-hmm. So if you scored more on your rating, both in terms of accommodation and quality of care, you got a better fee. Mm-hmm. But you knew that if you actually bothered to invest in your home, particularly in terms of the property, or you paid your staff better, you did better staff training, and you got a higher rating, that actually you would be benefiting from it.
Yeah, it's properly incentivised. It's a meritocracy. It provides probably some healthy competition within the local community as well for people to raise their standards.
But another gentleman pointed out to me, he said that, and I don't know whether this is actually true because I've not checked it out, but he said that he believes that Nottinghamshire actually has more outstanding CQC rated homes now, and the improvement over the county over the last 10 years has been huge. So we put in a system there which actually distributed the available money in a fairer way, which also incentivised people to bother to invest and improve.
Yeah.
And it was lovely to hear somebody coming back to me and saying, actually, this worked. Mm-hmm. As far as I know, it's the only county that does this. Everybody else has boiled it down to it's a single price that fits everybody, but it doesn't fit anybody. So I do feel that we are guilty of mismanaging the information, and we have to recognise the fact that there are still going to be older quality care homes that don't have. I went to see one recently where bedroom was less than 10 square metres still, didn't have an ensuite facility. I went to one recently where they told me they were en-suites, but actually it was a toilet in the corner of the room behind a curtain. I mean, it's really not good. But they are providing a much-needed, affordable service.
Solution, yeah.
The care was good. CQC was still happy with what was being provided there, but the accommodation is not of modern hotel standards. But that's the world we're in. And if anything, it's interesting, I was talking to somebody recently, going back even 20 years ago, twin rooms, shared rooms were going to be a thing of the past. Most of the banks we work for will want us to value assuming all single room accommodation.
Sure. Yeah.
And yet we're now seeing actually an increase uptake of twin rooms again.
That's interesting.
And local authorities who a few years ago were very draconian in terms of actually saying we will not refer people into a shared room are now doing so because they have no choice.
Got you. Yeah.
Because we have lost so much affordable capacity. They have to put people where they can afford to put them. That's the nature of the beast at the moment. I'm not saying that's right, but that's where we are, and we need to accept that. We did an exercise a few years ago because I was getting fed up with the fact that CQC kept reporting a figure that said actually the care home provision in the UK was going up. Year on year, it was still going up. And I did an exercise for them, which I presented to the Department of Health. And I said, you do realise that over the last 7 years, we have lost homes that have actually closed was 70,000 beds, registered bed spaces across the UK.
Sure.
In that same period of time, homes that had opened created another 70,000 bed spaces. So
Sure.
you're absolutely right that the overall total has remained largely the same. But what you're missing out is that most of the homes that closed were the older, poorer Victorian conversions.
Sure.
And all the homes that have opened, by their nature, have to be self-funded, private, £1,100, £1,200, £1,300 a week private fees. So this is hiding the fact that actually local authorities around the country, their affordable capacity is just diminished. And that's why homes at that level actually are now fuller in most cases than they've ever been before, because actually even if the room isn't very good, I can still sell that because there is not much choice. So the trouble we've got is that how do we get to a point where everybody has access to what we now see as a market standard room in a nice purpose-built care home? That would be lovely. But the reality is there are going to be haves and have-nots, and that isn't going to be a quick process.
Absolutely.
But we shouldn't kid ourselves that that's what's going to happen.
Be interesting to see what happens over the next few years. I'll be hopefully speaking to a lot of people about this subject to see what their opinions and perspectives and things are. I mean, ultimately, as time goes by, the number of you'd like to think that it creates a net positive improvement in the provision and the kind of facilities that are available to people. But what does that kind of getting from point A to B? What does that look like, and what kind of disruption happens in the meantime? Again, kind of one of those things. Who knows? We don't know what's going to happen from a funding perspective, from a political perspective. So it does throw quite a lot into question. But it certainly makes for interesting times.
Well, I think the fact that the current government have now managed to avoid producing their green paper on the future of social care for several years now, and still delaying it, it's not an easy question to answer, because we need to either put more money, more resources into that at the expense of other things. So it's unfortunately we're now getting to a point where the problem is getting bigger all the time by delaying it, and it does need some radical solution. It's not going to be something that can be easily tweaked around the edges. And we're dismantling some of the wider social care structure, particularly in some of the local authorities, and it's going to be very difficult to rebuild all of that. So I think die early is the message. I think I often tell people that both my grandfather and my father both all died at 60, so I've only got about another 5 years anyway, so it's not a problem for me.
Before we we have the potential to go down a political wormhole, which isn't a space that I particularly want to go. So, slight change of gear. So, Pindus, tell me more about what's going on in the world at Pindus.
A lot of the same, really. I mean, we are still, a lot of our work is still in support of bank funding. for acquisitions, for expansions, for refinances, that sort of thing. We're in a really, I think, a unique marketplace at the moment, and this has been really I've been through 3 or 4 recessions now, I think, in my time, but this wasn't the same as all the others because it was fueled by the credit crunch. So when we started coming out of recession, it wasn't ever going to bounce back the way it did before. Unfortunately, we then had, as we were emerging from that, the national living wage was introduced, which had a big impact upon businesses, particularly care homes, because it was the fear of what that was going to do, stalled the market again. Then it came in, and we had to adjust to that. We were just doing that, and then we had the EU referendum and everything that goes on from there. So it's been and continues to be a weird marketplace, and the lending institutions have been put under intense pressure by having to now work to a whole new set of rules in terms of Basel III, etc. So the market's been pretty flat for a long period of time. And I think particularly for care home businesses, I said this recently, is I think that care businesses are, I'm always very careful to say they're underpriced at the moment. They're not undervalued because that would be suggesting it's our fault. They're underpriced, which suggests it's the market's fault. Because logic suggests that actually for a lot of care home businesses, which are still perceived to be a good business to be in, a good investment opportunity, and yet the pricing is quite modest. And I think that at some point when we ever get back to any kind of normality, whenever that might be politically, that's when I think people who have got care businesses will see value start to rise again. So it's very interesting to try and, in my job, to actually look at those businesses to understand where they're at. What I always say about Pinders is, whilst we're seen as valuers, we are business appraisers. That's the exciting, interesting bit. The valuation bit is just a mathematical calculation at the end. That's the easy bit. But the business appraisal part is the bit that actually is interesting. So going into a business, understanding where that business has come from, where it is now, where it can go in the future, looking at its potential. And what's encouraging is that we're actually probably seeing better trading performance from a lot of care home businesses now than we've ever seen before. When people turn around and say, mow, there's not enough money, etc., blah, 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 the usual sort of thing, I go to see care homes, particularly those in the sort of middle to upper middle market, that are now really doing well and making very, very good levels of profitability. And quite rightly too, because people have invested and have to work very hard to maintain that level of that.
Absolutely.
The interesting thing is that whilst we've been seeing profit margins and turnover improving, we're actually seeing values staying much the same, which actually suggests that therefore the profit multiplier for the valuation hasn't actually kept pace. And part of the problem is we have a gap between expectations. So if I'm now running a business where I'm making 40% profit margin and my accountant tells me, what, for goodness sake, just keep doing what you're doing, you're making really good money, where could you invest your money if you did sell by the time you paid all your inheritance or capital gains tax, etc., you might as well carry on doing what you're doing. So those people are saying, I wouldn't sell unless I could get top dollar. The purchasers, who tend to be more experienced purchasers at that level, are coming and going, well, the world is still complete chaos. We still think care homes are a good business to be in, but we don't know in the short to medium term what might happen. We don't yet know about Brexit. We don't know about staffing levels. We don't know about the green paper when it does come in with that kind of impact. So not a good time to be making big investment decisions if you don't have to. Unless you can pick something up which is a bit of a bargain so that you can protect yourself from the downside, but you also got the potential to add value. So we end up with a situation where the vendor wants top dollar, the purchaser wants a bargain, and there's a gap between them which stagnates the marketplace.
Sure.
Until the vendor gets so fed up that they go, I just want to sell to, because I do need to retire and enjoy this. Okay. At which point they'll probably sell at below what they should. And what's really annoying is that becomes a comparable for my next valuation, because I can enter and say, well, that one sold for that level. and that tends to then become the benchmark for the next pricing.
Of course.
So it's a very strange marketplace. So we're seeing deals happening, but they tend to take a lot longer, and they, I think, a lot of time are priced at a level they're achieving sales at a level that's probably at least 1 year's profits lower than I think should be.
Sure, that's interesting. Surely there's always a disconnect though in between seller expectations and buyer expectations.
Yeah, there is, but I think it's wider than it's ever been.
Okay.
And I think this is partly fueled by purchasers and particularly the banks, quite risk averse. The banks are much more cautious than they've ever been before, quite understandably. So we're now seeing ideal, if you've got a 40-bed plus, all single, all ensuite, making good profits, self-funding clients, sell that any day of the week, and the banks will all fall over themselves to do it. The trouble is nobody wants to sell those because they're the ones that are making lots of money.
Making all the money, of course, yeah.
So it's trying to actually find the right level where I can still get the bank funding to actually make it work. But if I'm going to pay, I was talking about somebody yesterday that they've got a home that's not brilliant in terms of accommodation, it's old style, etc., but is full, including the fact that it had 11 twin rooms, and they're full all the time. And the purchaser's going, but I'm worried about this. But I'm going, but my point being is it's full up with local authority, publicly funded people, so nobody could come in and undercut you.
Yeah.
Is the policy about to change? Probably not, because but you're then looking at this business that's making 99% occupancy year on year. But you get an investor to look at that, quite rightly, they're going to go,
not sure about that
well,
one.
I'm not going to pay you on that, I'm going to pay you down here.
Yeah.
And interestingly, we're already seeing that it's been on the market and the purchase price has been negotiated down to a level where you're thinking it's almost the multiplier being applied to the theoretical fair maintainable trade. If it was all singles and it was much smaller and doing much, much less. And the vendor's going, but hold on a second, I'm making all this money.
Yeah.
So there is a disconnect. But I do think at the moment it's a buyer's market purely on the fact that to get a sale through, the buyer and their bank have to be on board.
Sure, cool.
So getting somebody to agree the price is the easy bit. Getting it across the line with bank funding, etc., is more difficult.
It's interesting you mentioned fair maintainable trade. Obviously, we've talked about that. You've done a great job of educating me on the subject of valuations over the time that we've known each other, which I'm very thankful for. But from the perspective of remind me again. So there's the snapshot of the business today and the fair maintainable trade. What was the acronym for?
Well, we say it's current trade assessment.
Current trade.
CTA.
CTA. How many? Just because this is something that I've seen happen quite a few times recently. You've got a seller that's bringing a care home business to market, and they're effectively valuing their business on the CTA value rather than the FMT value. Is that quite common? Is that kind of almost a mistake that operators selling that they fall into quite often?
I don't know whether it's a mistake or whether they're
being overly optimistic.
Well, let me put it this way: not all selling agents in the marketplace are as scrupulous as others, and some will quite happily inflate the price and the expectation to get an instruction. So, and if you've run a business for the last 10, 20 years and you want to get out and somebody tells you that they can get you top dollar for it, you will be easily swayed. So I do think sometimes that's part of it. And quite often, if you have run a business for that long, you're in a bit of a bubble where you perhaps don't realise quite where the marketplace is. You've been focused so much on actually running your care business that you don't necessarily look outside. So I do think there's part of that. I think part of the, just going back to the CTA and FMT thing, I mean, one of the things which I think is dangerous from a valuation point of view is to get too focused on the FMT. And I see some other valuers where they will publish their industry stats and they'll turn around and say our sample says that staffing in a nursing home should be 57% of turnover. So that's what an efficient operator should get. Therefore, when I'm doing my FMT, I'm going to go at 57% of turnover, and that's my staffing cost. Which, of course, is fine if you've got a normal home. But if you've got a home that's got very, very high fees, you're just going to have the same staffing cost. That's largely fixed. So it may be that it's only 52%.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that it's understaffed. It just means that actually from that fixed staffing cost base, you're able to charge £100 more than the one down the road.
Yeah, sure.
So working to percentages is always dangerous. So I think the first bit is to make sure that your FMT, you've got your normal assumptions. But the key bit then is to actually look and say, but for this particular business, how does that compare to the norm?
Yeah.
And not to impose the norm on that home, but to be aware of why it's different. And that can be lots of reasons. You might go in there and say, well, actually, the wage bill here is only 45%, which seems very low. But actually, it's run by Mr. and Mrs. Nice Person, the owners. So actually, that's a husband and wife wage bill. And if I bought this, I'm going to have to bring at least one manager in and probably somebody else to take the two roles. So actually, my wage bill is going to be different to the one in the accounts. So don't base it on that. You've got to base it on this. There's lots of other bits that you need to look at. And I valued one recently where, as I went through all the accounts, and I know what every expense should be for a home of that sort, and a number of them were much higher than it. And when we then looked into that, there were particular reasons about the location of that property, about the age and size of the property, and therefore the maintenance costs, etc. The layout of the property was incredibly inefficient. It was actually split into two separate units with a connection, so I had to staff each unit differently. So my staffing costs were always going to be higher. So the owner had been turning around and saying, well, this is what it should be doing, this is what it should be worth.
Sure.
Which we're turning going, but never will be a normal home.
Because, yeah.
So the great thing, I hammer it to our valuers all the time, is, your job is to tell the story. You've got to go in there and find out what the story for that particular business is. Now, it may be that it's exactly in line with the FMT. And you go in here and say, that care home is exactly normal and it fits the bill, and therefore the CTA and the FMT are exactly the same. But you can sometimes get them that they're either above or below. It may be that it's under trading because the owners have lost interest, or quite often happens is one of the owners, I've got a case at the moment, unfortunately, sadly, where one of the owners died suddenly, and going through a process now where this business is now struggling because it's lost its focus.
Sure.
So if you look at its current trade assessment, it's underperforming at the moment, but there's no fundamental reason why it shouldn't improve going forward, so you can then take a more positive view. So it's very, very critical that, yes, the FMT is your starting point. That's what a reasonable, efficient operator should be able to do, but it doesn't necessarily mean that every business will follow it. The skill of the business valuer is to actually look at it and say, actually, why doesn't this one fit the expectation, if that's the case?
And I guess that's coming back to one of your original points around the telling of the story of the home, to look at it kind of objectively, if you like, understanding what the rules of thumb are, but then understanding when they're either not applicable or only applicable to a certain extent.
Yeah, and if you're acting ultimately on behalf of the purchaser and or their bank, they want to know that. This is a huge, big investment you're making, and to be honest, the valuation, the value part, is the least important. And that may sound a bit odd for a director of a valuation firm to say that, but the appraisal part is what I would be interested in. If I was investing my money, I'm just, can you go in there and do me due diligence to actually find out exactly what it is I'm buying? Because, if you were selling your house, you don't plaster all over the sales details all of the things that are wrong with it. You try and hide those.
Of course.
So my job as a business valuer is to try and find the things that you've hidden, and both in the accounts and in the property. So the due diligence part, we even have clients who, when they're buying, especially experienced clients, will commission a PINDA report as an appraisal of what they're buying, even if the bank then insists on having somebody else to do an independent valuation for them. And they'll pay for two because the valuation part is for the bank.
Yeah, sure.
If all goes wrong, how much we've got. The appraisal part is what a purchaser wants because that's the bit that actually tells them the story about the business that they're actually taking on.
Thing is, that's almost the business dynamics. It comes back to the story part of the equation again, doesn't it? It's understanding, so what am I buying, and then what do I need to do once I've bought it to make sure that everything goes in the direction that I want it and need it to.
The most fun I have is when I'm doing consultancy work rather than valuation work, where I have clients who will actually say to me, we're looking to buy this, or we're looking to do this, we're looking to add an extension, can you come along now and work with us? So rather than waiting until we've done it and then come and point out the things we've got wrong, is actually, can you come along now, look at the plans, look at what we're going to do, look at the business that we're thinking of buying.
Yep.
These are our concerns. Can you now, look at it from that point of view?
Having that foresight as well, having that second pair of eyes. I guess that because you've done it for such a long time as well, you have got a unique perspective and one that enables you to look at things in a certain way. One of the things that we've talked about before, because you've kind of accumulated your unique perspective, is around coming back to the care element of a care home business, is employee-centered care.
Yeah.
Tell me about that one, because it's an interesting thought, and it's one that I think makes people think about the it's a different perspective to that of a lot of people, shall I say?
Yeah, I always have to be a bit careful about this because I like to be radical and throw some pebbles in the pond. So I actually said that I don't like the phrase person-centered care. I totally get it, but the trouble is it's now become overused, and everybody, again, it's in every press release along with 5-star luxury and home from home, and it's person-centered care.
Curtain copy.
It's sort of, yeah, of course, you're never going to say anything different to that. But I wrote a piece a couple of years ago now, and it came out of really, I had the pleasure of being a judge for the Caring Times Awards, and I was doing Care Home of the Year. And so I'm getting these people coming through the finalists, and they were from a wide range of different ages and types of homes, and yet they'd all got outstanding or very, very good CQC ratings, all very successful businesses. And at the end of it, I was trying to understand what it was that they all had in common. And what was great was that they all had a passion. Everybody that came in front of us were passionate about their home. And everybody there loved going to work. And I thought, this is interesting. And it was whether you're talking to the owner, the manager, or members of the staff, they all had a clear, shared view of what good care should be. And out of that, what came really was the thing that I thought they all had in common was actually, it was all about staff-centred care. And this is really, really obvious. So it's not rocket science, because this is really general management theory, is that actually if you invest in your staff, in your employees, and I'm not talking about money or just money, I'm really talking about investing in them in terms of time and effort and retention, that they will enjoy their job more. If they enjoy their job more, they'll be more enthusiastic. If they enjoy coming to work, they will come to work instead of throwing a sickie. So even when they are actually not feeling great, they'll still turn in, because actually that's the job that they come to do. And that works in any business. If you are treating your staff like it's just a job, and I see lots of homeowners, and I still meet them today, where their attitude is they're lucky to have a job. And it's not about then paying them lots of money. You pay them the right amount in the local marketplace, but it's actually when one of them has a good idea, or even has a bad idea, that you go, actually, we'll try that. How much is it going to cost? You've had an idea we could do something that would be fun for the residents, and it's going to cost 250 quid. Okay, well, you sort it all out. We'll do that. So we then pay 250 quid, We've had a lovely time doing this activity with the residents. The residents have had a really good time, so they're happy. The relatives are all happy. Because the relatives and the residents are happy, when CQC come and inspect, they're happy. So you probably get a better rating because actually everybody's happy. It's cost you 250 quid.
Yeah.
And then you see homes that have got a £50,000 a year agency bill to replace the staff who don't turn in because you treat them like dirt. So for a few hundred quid every few months, you know, you could spend £10,000 a year investing in your staff and in your residents and doing things nice. And you will get that back in better occupancy, better fees, better ratings, less agency costs. So it's a no-brainer. But there's still people out there with no brain who don't get it. So I'm just trying to look at turning it around, that because I think if you go for person-centred care without doing staff-centred care, you might fail. If you do staff-centred care, person-centred care will happen. So why wouldn't you do staff-centred care? And I think we're into some really exciting times now because, again, I've been hearing for 29 years now, you know, how do we encourage people to come into the care sector because it's just a job and it's minimum wage and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But people are actually starting to, instead of just moaning about that, they're doing things about it. And I've got 2 or 3 operators now who are trying an experiment, which is that they pay salaries to all their staff. Every member of staff from the cleaner up, that's wrong. But every member of staff, the nurses, the care assistants, the catering staff, the maintenance man, the gardener, everybody gets a salary. Because if you are in a career, you get a salary. If you're in a job, you get a pay packet.
Yeah.
So you're immediately changing it from being I do a job to I'm in a career. There are advantages of having a salary if you're going to borrow money or get a mortgage, things like that. But it's that sense of actually I'm investing in you. So, you know, if you do need some time off, if you are ill or the kids are ill or everything like that, I'm not going to necessarily dock your wages for that because you're salaried and that's what we expect. But I equally expect you to put in the extra effort at times that we all do in our jobs. None of us work 37.5 hour week. So it's treating care staff as adults. Now, the interesting thing is it's still a bit early days in this, but the people who they've had most problem with are the qualified nurses.
Okay.
Who are incredibly cynical about the fact that they don't know how they're being ripped off, but they know they must be because why would you do this?
Right, yeah.
And I think that's a big problem we've got is almost how do we reshape the mentality of the health service and the care sector into actually thinking, let's do it differently. But there is almost this resistance to change from the staff themselves. But I think it's great that at least they are looking at that as a different way of doing it and actually trying to, you know, we've still got to pay the right amount, but how could I make your job fun? How could I make, because I know if I make your job fun, it works.
I mean, how I would describe what you're talking about is building and designing a culture rather than having a culture by default, so just allowing whatever to happen and then you're at the mercy of whatever happens because people are turning up and taking a pay packet ultimately, or designing a culture. And that can mean investing in your team, that can mean, it can mean all manner of things, but ultimately treating people like humans, treating people like a team, treating people as they would expect to be treated in any other capacity. It does feel like quite a lot of the time that all too many operators unfortunately haven't quite cottoned on to the fact that, funnily enough, if you treat people really well, as you say, they've got a spring in their step when they turn up to work because they feel valued, they feel rewarded, they want to do a better job. And we're not talking widgets here, we're not talking manufacturing. When somebody in the care sector does a better job, our vulnerable people get looked after better. It's fascinating that that's not the default position though. For a lot of people.
I was talking to somebody, I won't quote who it is, but they're from one of the major not-for-profit organisations, and he's tried to introduce almost a partnership profile. So very much like the John Lewis partnership. You know, we're all partners in this, and this sort of. And he said it was interesting again. It's almost if you say to one of your cleaners, what I'd like you to see is that spend some time chatting to the residents. So as you're cleaning their room, engage with them. If you say that to a qualified nurse, there's almost this attitude of, well, I'm too busy to do that because I'm a nurse.
Sure.
Whereas if you say it to a cleaner, the cleaner's going, what, you're saying that I can stop cleaning toilets and chat to the residents, and that's encouraged. Bring it on. So the maintenance guy, will do that. The kitchen assistants, because they actually look and go, we'd love to do something more than being stuck peeling potatoes or cleaning the loos. So again, I think it's a difficult cultural change that we've got to take it from where it is and almost reinvent that we're going to allow you to do this because that's what we want you to do. And we're going to empower you to actually do that because we think that's going to be beneficial for you. You'll enjoy your job more. Our residents will enjoy their lives more. It's great. But I went to a care home recently and the owner, I do this thing now, it's just, I can. I always ask to take photographs of the staff room for care homes. And sometimes there isn't a staff room. And I often hear the phrase that, the staff haven't got time to sit around. Or it's a tiny little room with the boiler in the corner and one little desk and a kettle. And I went to one where the guy said, well, here it is, but it's locked because the phrase he came up with was because he said the staff abused the privilege. And I thought, how can you get a culture where you've got to that point where you as the employer have withdrawn a crappy facility because you think that your staff don't deserve it? It may be that that's true, but how have you got to a point where the breakdown of relationship between management and staff is so fundamental? That's really quite worrying.
Unfortunately, that individual has seen a problem and fixed what they saw as being the problem. What they haven't done is they haven't addressed the cause of the problem in the first place.
He was the same chap who came out with the phrase, they're lucky to have a job.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
So again, but he owned that care home for 20 odd years. And it was a perfectly successful home, but it was, I can walk into homes and you can appraise a home pretty much with two senses. One is smell, unfortunately. The other one is hearing, when you listen for the buzz. Yeah. And you listen.
Feel it though, it's palpable when you walk into a home that's got that energy.
Quite often I walk in there, I have to be careful because they all think I'm a doctor. Because if you wear a jacket and a tie, are you the doctor? But you get that sense. It doesn't matter whether it's tiny, big, purpose-built, small, whatever. You actually look and go, there's something going on here. Which, to be honest, thinking ahead, and it's obviously much nearer for me than you. When if we get to that point, you want something to happen every day.
Of course you do.
Boredom is the worst possible thing. If you're just existing rather than living, it's just pretty dreadful. So the more that you can actually bring people's life to life, the better. So
it's interesting, isn't it? I find it fascinating, whether it be a care home or any other business. I always like speaking to the people and asking them how they enjoy their job. I don't hear often enough those magical words, I love my job. We're here in the Freeth's office today. The first thing that the receptionist lady said to me when I was chatting to her about her job was the fact that she loved her job. And that shows a solid culture. That means that they've invested in it, they've designed their culture, they've done certain things that have made sure that their team are empowered. They feel good about turning up to work every day.
It's a nice thing when you go to usually a smaller home that's run under management and there's a slip of the tongue where the manager in particular, but quite often the staff will refer to my home. And then correct themselves because the owners are there. And you go, but that's what you think, isn't it? Yeah. And I know, because I know that you turn in over the weekend, you come in late at night, you'll cover shifts, you'll do everything that's necessary because it's your home. It's one of the radical things that if I could reinvent the care sector, I would make it impossible for anybody to own more than 3 care homes. Because
it's controversial, John.
Well, Chai Patel is a really good bloke. I've got a lot of time for Chai Patel, but I disagree with him on something he was quoted on media, which was that when they bought some Bupa homes, he said, HC1, you've got to be big to be able to provide effective care. And I'm going, well, Southern Cross were the biggest.
Yeah,
Four Seasons were the biggest.
Did it? That one hasn't gone too particularly well recently.
It doesn't work. It's a nonsense. The best quality care is by Mr. and Mrs. Nice Person running one home because they put their heart and soul into it. Even when they get their second home or possibly their third home, you are diluting that intensity. When you then get bigger and bigger and you start to fragment that, and particularly when you get to the point where you've got regional managers and district directors and layers and layers of decision making, it's very, very difficult to continue that, and that's why the big groups ultimately tend to falter. So I think small is ideal, and I think what would be really nice is a bit like pharmacies in this country where it's all done on a license. So that we can control the number of pharmacies in a particular town and it's always in matched, etc., etc. We should probably do the same with care homes.
That's an interesting
and we should actually then be able to control, to improve the quality, to make sure that it actually fulfills the requirements of the area. Not leave it to chance, not leave it to people to decide when they're going to build. But also, I think, just try and stop this big group. The best group I know in terms of operation is based in Hertfordshire, and every one of their homes is within an hour's drive of their head office. And they won't go beyond that because they know that they can go and see every single home every day.
Got it, yeah.
And I think that works. But when you start to get too big or you start to get national, it's very difficult to actually maintain that same level because it's just like any big organisation. How do you actually make sure that the vision of the guy at the top or the girl at the top goes right the way through?
That's one thing that we get called in to help operators with a lot. So the owner's got a big bold vision, they've got aspirations, and they've got a set of values, whether it's implicit or they've I call it kind of carving it into stone, if you like. But as you say, it's making sure that's fed and woven into the daily behaviours of everyone that turns up to work. The exercise that we do is we help operators to map out what their kind of intent and vision is for their business. We then work with them around their values, but not just having it on the website as a kind of a lip service type exercise. It's okay. So what are your values? What do they mean to you as an organisation? And then also, what are the behaviours that are attached to those values? Because that's your operating system. You can have the best system, you can have the best environment, but if you don't have a high performance culture embedded into your team, there's only so much that you're ever going to be able to achieve anyway. And of course, to your point, as you grow, you've got the potential for that to be diluted, and some people do a great job of it. There are bigger operators that manage to keep those really solid values interwoven into everything that they do as they grow, and then some not so well. And it's a shame when that happens.
But the guys who have done it successfully, and there are some who've grown their groups, have to work so hard. You are constantly running to make sure that everybody understands and everybody is reminded, and the culture is actually still as you want it to be, and it needs to be then feeding back and learning and evolving and changing. So it's not, but it's really, really hard work. And delegation's great, but you've got to be able to then delegate to people who completely understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, completely agree.
So it's a hard model to do.
These are the people that will achieve outstanding, whether that be CQC's version of outstanding or the benchmark that they've personally set within their organisation. But the people that do constantly reinvent themselves, and they've kind of got like a virtuous cycle of improvement. So it's a case of, okay, well, we're doing a good job here, but good today might not be a good job tomorrow. We need to work out what we need to be doing to challenge ourselves and have that kind of open-minded forum where people can challenge each other. Like my favourite example of a description, if you like, of high performance, it's not doing everything right all of the time, because that's just not realistic. It's when you do something right, it's using that as fuel to continue doing things right. And when you're doing things wrong, kind of being humble enough to recognise that in yourself, or at least have a team member to be able to pull you up and say, actually, you know what, that wasn't so good. But let's talk about that, and let's work out what can we learn from the situation, and how can we put it in that virtuous cycle of improvement. Because if you don't have that, the old adage of if you're not moving forwards, you're if you're standing still, you're moving backwards, or whatever it is. Again, if that's I always use the example of a manufacturing business, but if that's in a care business, if people aren't pushing themselves, then people aren't going to enjoy the best possible life experience, and that's sad. It's obviously not what we want. We want people to live fulfilled lives. We want people to move into care homes and have a life. And I think you encapsulated it perfectly earlier. Are people living, or are they merely existing?
And it's a shame. You mentioned about getting outstanding ratings. I think there's a danger that the CQC rating is a little bit about existing. It's about existing safely.
Yeah.
I talked to a CQC inspector once about the benefits of balconies, and they were saying, they're terribly dangerous things because somebody could, grab a chair, drag it over here, climb up on that chair, and throw themselves off. To which I said two things, which didn't go down well. One is, well, they're going to die soon anyway because they're very old. But the other one was, if you've got to a point where that person feels like that, it's not the balcony's fault.
Yeah, it's the environment in which
there's
they're
something
living.
fundamentally wrong here.
Yeah.
And yet, if you provided that balcony so they could get out and see the sky and then feel the wind on their face, that might actually make their life worth living.
Of course.
But we've gone into this thing about pickling people in aspic, and as long as you've got all the paperwork that says they haven't died, then that's fine.
Good.
That's not
good care. Yeah.
That's a bit unfair, but I think that some inspectors, it's about as long as you haven't done anything wrong,
Then
that's
okay.
good.
Yeah.
Which isn't really as good as it should be. And
what would you like to see in the sector in the coming years?
I'm going to answer that in a political way, because I think there needs to be a fundamental change in the way that we fund and manage care. And I think this is really about changing our structure politically, not just for care but for everything else. Because we have two very clear pieces of evidence at the moment. One is that every local authority in the country is saying we haven't got enough money to provide the services, and we've got central government going, well, we're pumping more money in, so I don't know what the problem is. Well, clearly somewhere between those two, either somebody's lying or the money's going somewhere and it's not being used effectively. And I think it'd be interesting. Unfortunately, I don't believe it's going to happen because I don't quite see it's going to be turkeys voting for Christmas. But what I'd like to see is a complete restructuring of our taxation system. And I have a friend who's very lucky, lives in Switzerland, and the Swiss system, which I'd love to see, is that 40% of your tax revenue effectively goes to the parish council. 40% goes to effectively the county council, and only the top 20% goes to national government. So every village, let alone every town in Switzerland, has fabulous schools. Everything is clean and tidy. The roads are immaculate. Social care is super, because the local population has that money and chooses to spend it locally. Whereas what we do here is most of our money goes to central government. And I mean, I went to a parish council meeting for my own little area, and they were debating for some time whether or not they could afford to gift a grant of £75 for a project in the local village.
It's a sad state of affairs.
I can't do anything about the potholes in the roads outside my house because actually that's a county council thing, and the county council says we haven't got the money from national government. So I think we need to have that, and politically, I think that's where a lot of the whole thing with Brexit vote as a protest, with the Jeremy Corbyn factor a couple of years ago, is people actually saying we're so disconnected with national politics, and particularly now, But we're actually disconnected with all of national politics. So it doesn't matter what party you're in, you're all going to basically do the same. What we'd like is actually more decision making at a local level. And if that was the case, then the social care budget comes locally and you spend it much more effectively.
Sure.
So I don't see how it's going to happen, because it would involve national politicians voting almost to give power down to a local level. And we'd also need better local politicians,
sure,
which is a difficult one to do. But I don't see there's going to be much of a difference if that funding structure doesn't fundamentally change. But equally, I think we need to stop just assuming that money is the answer. We need to spend the money more effectively. We need to actually accept the fact that there are going to be some homes for people with no money, and some people with more money can choose. That's not a problem. But I do think that we need to actually, we can still make homes work even on local authority fees. They won't be that good, but we can still make it work. So, I don't unfortunately see there's going to be a radical change in the next few years. But we're going to see, the impact of telecare, the impact of technology. I'm still not convinced about domiciliary care as a concept at local authority level, because poor domiciliary care, where you are looking at 10, 15-minute visits, is not good enough. So how can we provide that support in a more effective way? It isn't a cheap, low-cost alternative. It's not as effective, unfortunately.
And what do you think will happen within the sector?
I shall retire, and no, I think we will continue. I think the property guys will continue to build. I think the availability of land and the desirability of land might slowly become a factor, as it is already. I think we potentially will see further separation and division of some of the big operators, which I don't think would be a bad thing. I flagged up at the time with Four Seasons that Four Seasons was a deal that the only way it could ever happen when it was done by Terra Firma was for it to be split up, and then you could have actually made it work. If you didn't do that, the results were going to be inevitable, as they were. I predicted Southern Cross as well, but nobody listened to that, because, again, people made money out of it, so it was convenient. I just think that big is not beautiful, and therefore I think a more effective long-term provision could be by actually breaking some of these big groups into smaller divisional groups, which I think would protect us from another potential problem.
It will be really interesting to see what happens with Four Seasons. I hear all sorts of things, some of them good, some of them heartening. Only time will tell, of course.
Yeah, I mean, Four Seasons has already been going down that route, because they've sold off a number of their homes already, and that's been going quietly. The latest thing was really not particularly relevant in that, in terms of the administration. But I do think that was one where it was already being separated down, and probably will continue for a while as well.
So, John, what's the best piece of advice that you've ever received?
I'm going to give you a flippant answer for this, going right back to the beginning, because it was a bit of advice that was good, but I didn't heed it, was don't go on stage wearing that dress.
Good stuff. And if you were to choose one message for somebody looking to make a positive impact in the sector, what would that be?
When I speak at seminars for people who are thinking of investing in the care sector, of which there are loads, I always used to say, finish with one thing to give them as a thought, which is, if you're thinking of coming into the care sector to make money, don't. If you're thinking of coming into the care sector to provide really good quality care, you will make money.
Sound advice. Excellent. Well, thank you very much, John. It's been
Pleasure,
an absolute pleasure. Good to see you.